Nobody in our family had ever heard of the Cedar Ridge HOA. Not my grandfather in 60 years of owning that land. Not my mother. Not my uncle. Yet somehow, they had scheduled a public auction for our farm. Buyers were already being contacted. Notices were posted at every gate, like it was already over. And that's when I found out who was behind it. A woman named Brenda Kensington. And she didn't just make a mistake. She crossed a line she could never undo. My grandfather, Earl Mitchell, bought that land in 1961. 62 acres of Tennessee countryside, sitting just outside a small town called Cedar Ridge. He built the farmhouse himself. Him and his two brothers over one long summer. Raised cattle, grew corn. Watched for generations of this family take their first steps on that porch. When he passed 3 years ago at 89, the farm transferred to my mother and uncle cleanly. No disputes, no drama, county records updated, will executed perfectly. As far as anyone knew, that land was untouchable. So when my mother called me on a Tuesday morning, voice trembling, saying, "They put a sign on Grandpa's fence. They're selling the farm," I genuinely thought she had misread something. She hadn't. My cousin Derek drove out that same afternoon. He didn't find one sign. He found 5, posted at every visible entry point along the fence line. Evenly spaced, like whoever placed them wanted every passing car on that county road to see them clearly. Each one read the same. Notice of property auction. Pending HOA enforcement action. Official-looking borders. Bold black lettering. A date 19 days away. And at the bottom, a contact number for something called the Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association Compliance Office. Derek stood at that fence for a long time. Then he called me and said very quietly, "This doesn't look like a mistake." That's when the neighbor calls started. Old friends of Grandpa's, people from town. And I'll be honest, most of them weren't calling to fight alongside us. They were calling to offer storage space for our furniture. One man, Gerald, who'd known Grandpa 40 years, told my mother in the kindest voice imaginable that he had room in his barn if we needed it. She cried for an hour after that call, because that's what a legal-looking document does to a community. It doesn't matter if it's legitimate or fraudulent. The moment people see official print and a deadline, something shifts. Suddenly, you're defending yourself. Suddenly, the burden falls on you. And 19 days is not a lot of time when you don't even understand the accusation yet. By Thursday, we had a name. Brenda Kensington, Compliance Director of the Cedar Ridge HOA, a subdivision built about 4 miles from Grandpa's farm roughly 12 years ago. People in Cedar Ridge knew her well, not fondly. She had fined a widow for wind chimes, cited a retired teacher for parking at what she called a non-compliant driveway angle. She ran that little HOA like it was her personal kingdom, and she'd never once lost a fight she started. But here's what stunned us most when my Uncle Ron visited the county assessor's office Friday morning. The farm was still correctly listed in county records. Ownership, Margaret and Ronald Mitchell. No liens, no HOA affiliation. Not a single document connecting that land to Cedar Ridge, ever. Yet the auction notice referenced 18 months of unpaid fines, landscaping violations, fence infractions, failure to register an agricultural structure. Total amount claimed $14,000 for land that had never signed a single HOA agreement in its entire existence. And buried deep in the paperwork, in language dense enough to make your eyes blur, were 2 signature lines, both completely blank. Someone had already prepared the transfer documents. They just needed signatures that hadn't come yet. But the auction? The auction was already moving forward anyway. How does someone auction land they don't legally own and nearly get away with it? That answer was about to walk through the door in a black car nobody saw coming. The weekend passed quietly, too quietly. And in my experience, that kind of silence never means things are getting better. It means something is being prepared. By Monday morning, we found out exactly what. Brenda Kensington had sent formal letters to 11 prospective buyers, not casual inquiries. It's actual written correspondence on HOA letterhead, describing the farm as a distressed compliance asset available for acquisition. Through authorized enforcement proceedings, she had listed the acreage. She had described the farmhouse. She had even included a suggested opening bid. My Uncle Ron read that letter 3 times before he could speak. "She's already priced it," he finally said. She put a number on Grandpa's farm like it was a used car. That same Monday, 2 things happened that made our situation feel even more suffocating. First, a local real estate agent named Phil Garvey, someone we'd seen at church for years, drove slowly past the farm twice that afternoon. He didn't stop. He didn't wave. He just looked. And the way he looked at that property, measuring it with his eyes, the way buyers do, made my mother step away from the window and sit down at the kitchen table without saying a word. Second, Brenda Kensington called my mother directly. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. I wasn't on the line, but my mother recounted every word afterward, sitting very still, hands folded like she was trying to hold herself together. Brenda's tone, apparently, was not hostile. It was worse than that. It was patient, practiced, the tone of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how it ends. "Mrs. Mitchell," she had said, "I strongly encourage your family to cooperate with the process. Contesting an HOA enforcement action only increases the accrued fines. At this point, a voluntary transfer would actually protect your family's financial standing. Voluntary transfer of my grandfather's farm, the one he built with his hands, the one that was never hers to touch." My mother thanked her politely, hung up the phone, and then looked at me with an expression I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something quieter and more dangerous than fear. It was the look of someone who has just realized the other side genuinely believes they've already won. We hired a local attorney that Tuesday, a good man, thorough and careful. He spent 2 days reviewing everything Brenda had filed. And on Thursday evening, he called us with an update that was equal parts reassuring and alarming. Reassuring, the county records were clean. Our ownership was unambiguous. Alarming, the HOA's paperwork, while deeply flawed, had been filed through an actual legal channel. An obscure municipal compliance statute that, in the right circumstances, could allow an HOA to place a temporary administrative hold on a neighboring property pending a formal boundary dispute. Hearing temporary, that was the key word. But here's what made his voice tighten when he said it. The auction date fell before the standard window for a formal hearing response. Brenda hadn't just filed paperwork. She had timed it, deliberately, carefully. If nobody pushed back fast enough, the auction would legally proceed before the family ever got a proper day in front of a judge. She wasn't making a power move. She was running a clock. Friday morning, our attorney made one phone call. Not to the HOA, not to the county. To a man named Walter Greer, a property law specialist out of Nashville who had handled boundary and title disputes for 31 years. A man our grandfather had apparently trusted enough to store something important with, something he never mentioned to the family. Locked away quietly for a moment he hoped would never come. Walter listened, asked 3 questions, then said something that shifted the air in the entire room. "Tell them nothing. I'll be there Monday morning. And tell your family not to worry about the auction." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. But Brenda Kensington had no idea what was walking through that door Monday morning, and neither did we. Not fully. Not yet. Monday arrived the way important days sometimes do. Ordinary on the surface, extraordinary underneath. The auction was scheduled for 11 o'clock. By 9:30 a.m., Brenda Kensington had already set up a folding table near the farm's main gate. Printed bid sheets, a small sign with the HOA logo, 2 board members standing beside her like she'd brought witnesses to her own victory. She looked, by every account, completely confident. That was her first mistake of the morning. At 9:55 a.m., a black car pulled slowly down the county road and stopped at the gate. A man stepped out, tall, unhurried, carrying a single leather folder under his arm. He wore a gray suit that didn't need to announce itself. He looked at the folding table, at the bid sheets, at Brenda Kensington's carefully arranged display of authority, and his expression didn't change, even slightly. He walked straight toward her and said, in a voice calm enough to silence everything around it, "Who authorized this auction?" Brenda straightened, lifted her chin. The Cedar Ridge HOA Board approved this enforcement action under Municipal Compliance Statute for 4B. Everything has been properly filed. Walter Greer nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he already knows the answer to every question he's about to ask. Then he opened the folder. The first document he placed on her table was the original property deed, Earl Mitchell, 1961. County stamped, fully recorded, completely unambiguous. Brenda glanced at it and said nothing. The second document was a certified boundary survey, current, commissioned within the last 90 days, showing the precise legal limits of the Cedar Ridge HOA jurisdiction. Walter set it directly beside the deed and let her look. The farm sat 430 feet outside HOA boundary lines. Not close, not debatable. 430 feet. The third document was a formal letter from the county registry office dated the previous Friday, stating clearly that no valid administrative hold existed on the Mitchell property. Because the filing Brenda had used required written consent from the county assessor's office, a consent that had never been requested, never been granted, and never been recorded anywhere. She had used a real statute. She had simply skipped the one step that made it legal. Walter tapped the three documents with one finger and said quietly, and without any satisfaction in his voice, "This auction has no legal standing. The notices are void. The buyer correspondence was unauthorized. And this property has never, not for a single day, fallen under your jurisdiction." Brenda Kensington's face did something in that moment that everyone present described the same way. It didn't collapse dramatically. It didn't flush with anger. It simply went still. The way a person looks when the story they've been telling themselves finally runs out of road. One of the board members beside her quietly picked up his bid sheets and folded them. The other one had already taken 2 steps back toward the parking area. Phil Garvey, the real estate agent who'd been hovering nearby since 9 o'clock, was gone before Walter finished his third sentence. Within 20 minutes, the folding table was taken down. The HOA sign came off the gate. The buyers who'd driven out that morning got back in their cars without a word exchanged, and Brenda Kensington walked to her vehicle alone. The HOA board held an emergency meeting 3 days later. We weren't there, but Gerald, the same neighbor who'd offered my mother his barn, attended as a community observer and called us that evening. 2 board members had formally distanced themselves from Brenda's actions. One had already contacted a personal attorney. The board voted to withdraw every notice, every fine, and every document connected to the Mitchell property, effective immediately. Brenda resigned her position as compliance director the following week. No announcement, no explanation, just quietly gone from a role she had treated like a throne. Walter Greer sat with our family at the kitchen table that Monday afternoon, in the same farmhouse Earl Mitchell had built with his own hands 63 years ago. He drank coffee. He answered every question carefully. And before he left, my mother asked him what it was my grandfather had stored with him, the thing that made him so certain when he answered that phone call. Walter smiled for the first time all day. "Your father was a careful man," he said. He kept a certified copy of the original deed, the full boundary survey from 1963, and a notarized letter stating that this land was never to be placed under any private governing authority, ever. He updated it every 10 years. The last update was 4 months before he passed. My mother pressed her hand over her mouth. My Uncle Ron looked out the window at the fields for a long moment. Grandpa had never mentioned it. Not once. He had simply prepared, quietly, thoroughly, the way men of his generation handled the things that mattered most. The farm never left our name. The auction never happened. And Brenda Kensington's grip on that neighborhood ended not with a courtroom battle or a dramatic confrontation, but with 3 documents placed calmly on a folding table by a man who never once raised his voice. Grandpa didn't fight her from the grave. He had already won years before she ever showed up.